Today we're discussing the psychology of nice guy syndrome, as well as ways that you can stop people pleasing. My name's Jasper Brown and welcome to The Conscious Masculine. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing all the mechanics, the inner workings, the deep psychological mechanisms of nice guy syndrome, and how this tendency that evolves within so many men can negatively impact our personal growth as well as our relationships. And as we look around the world, we see that there is this somehow epidemic of nice guys emerging and becoming much more prevalent. If you've clicked on this video or you're listening to this podcast, it's very likely that you have identified some of these tendencies within yourself. So let's begin with a general definition of nice guy syndrome. Nice guy syndrome refers to basically a set of behaviors and attitudes in men who tend to prioritize being nice and agreeable in order to gain approval from others, but often at the cost of their own needs and boundaries. So this is extremely common, as I've mentioned already, and we need to understand this distinction somehow between being genuinely nice and the deep psychological underlying issues that underpin nice guy syndrome and this cluster of characteristics that we see somehow representing men who we typically think of as nice guys. So let's dive into some of the common characteristics of nice guy syndrome. First of all, we have a tendency of people pleasing, going out of our way to appease and please those around us in the hope of getting validation and approval from them. Nice guys have a tendency of avoiding conflict, going to often great lengths to avoid displeasing others or to end up in conflictual situations. Nice guys commonly have a distinct lack of assertiveness, a difficulty standing up for themselves and saying no. This creates a pattern of resentment inside, which is often hidden or masked. As well as a whole array of strategies and manipulative behaviors that are hidden underneath this guise or facade of niceness. Another way of saying that is nice guys are pretending to be nice in order to get what they want. And often there is somehow unexpressed expectations that they have, also known as covert contracts, in which we will do things for other people and subtly expect or hope that they will do something in return in order to give us what we want. An example of this might be buying your girlfriend flowers and giving her a massage, or taking her out to dinner and expecting in return that she will give you sex without you directly asking for it. And because you've never asked for it, of course, she might not necessarily want to or choose to make love. And this creates a resentment inside of you because you went out of your way to do things for her and then she hasn't reciprocated. So you get upset or shitty or passive aggressive or a sort of festering resentment builds up inside of you because you feel like your needs aren't getting met, even though you didn't directly ask or state them. So some other examples of nice guy tendencies is the guy that always says yes to everyone, even when he wants to say no. We all know that typical nice guy who bends over backwards in order to please others. Is always willing to lend a hand, always at the disposal of others. If you ask him to help you move some couches on the weekend, or move house, or pick you up from the airport, he's always open and available, always saying yes. Even if it's not really serving him, even if it's inconvenient, he'll go out of his way because he's actually deeply afraid of saying no. Another example is the guy who avoids expressing his true feelings in order to keep the peace. But deep down he feels unappreciated and frustrated at a certain lack of authenticity that's existing inside of him. Another example is a man who believes that being overly accommodating will make him liked or loved, that he can win the approval of others by doing things for them, and in the end he just ends up feeling taken for granted. A nice guy is also the guy, that dude who is always friendly, agreeable, seemingly happy and optimistic. But you can get a bit of a sense that something is a bit off. It feels kind of fake in a certain way, and it doesn't feel truly authentic. So those are some of the examples of nice guys, and perhaps you see yourself in some of what I just described. I know I certainly see myself. And I've been on a long road of grappling with the mechanisms and the psychological underpinnings of nice guy syndrome. I have a long history of typically putting others' needs before my own, and that led me to feeling very lost and disconnected from myself in the process. As I look back on my life, I see that I have got myself into and created many, many situations that were a result of this lack of capacity to stand up for myself, an inability to express my needs and feelings, or to assert my boundaries. And that really resulted in a lot of pain, a lot of sufferance, and it took a lot of deep reflection and difficult conversations, a lot of hard looks in the mirror after the consequences of that behavior and the sufferance that I experienced as a result of that, that really forced me to see how I was my own worst enemy, and that I was complicit in all of the situations that I got myself into because I was undermining myself. It was my own naivety and these coping strategies and mechanisms that I'll be talking about very shortly that led me into those places where I allowed myself to become a doormat. I tolerated emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I gave others power over me. And I also joined a cult and allowed myself to become very ideological and swept up in dogma and a belief system, which gave all of my power away, basically. And it took going through all of that to really see the error and the mistakes that I made, which allowed me to be susceptible to that. And I want to break all of that down, and I want to talk about the psychological mechanisms that underpin those tendencies and how they play out. And hopefully this starts to connect some of the dots for you. My hope in constructing this and putting this out there and sharing my story, as well as my understanding and all of my insights around this, is to give you a deep lens to self-reflect. And I'll also be giving you some homework and some exercises towards the end, which will help you to start addressing this. I'll give you a comprehensive strategy that I've sort of fleshed out and come up with for myself and found very effective in the work that I do in coaching other men. But before we get to that, let's look at the origins of nice guy syndrome and really deeply understand where this pattern comes from and why it exists, because therein lies a lot of the clues and a lot of the understanding that we need to actually shift out of this pattern of behavior and into a much more empowered state. So as we look at nice guy syndrome, we can see that so many of these patterns evolve from our childhood experiences and the societal conditioning that we've received. This is a systemic problem in many ways, and it doesn't just occur in men, it also occurs in women. And basically we can see that we learn that early on in our lives, in order to get the love and the approval that we need, we have to behave in a way which is agreeable and avoiding conflict. And we basically develop these strategies as coping mechanisms for survival in order to ensure our safety and that we actually live. And deep within us is a very innate fear of being rejected and abandoned by our caregivers as children, because we are completely dependent on mum and dad or whoever was there for us in the beginning. Because without them, we would die in a matter of a day. And this creates a deep inner conflict within us, because we have these two competing primary needs as an infant, which is first of all attachment. Do we actually bond with our caregivers? Because if we don't bond with them, we're going to die. And the other is authenticity, to express, to actually vocalize and emote and explore the world and this experience of having a body. And in that process, we want to express ourselves in all the ways, to laugh, to cry, to throw tantrums. And we're largely barely in control of it at that stage. And yet this often lands with our caregivers as something deeply triggering, emotionally taxing, and overwhelming at times. So we quickly start to learn to sacrifice our authenticity in order to maintain secure attachment. We'll suppress some of the more difficult emotions that we feel in order to not get abandoned. And this is really the core, like the root of our attachment trauma. And this is essentially where these coping mechanisms of nice guy syndrome start to emerge, start to develop. And this gets reinforced and basically starts from that initial point of trauma or abandonment. And we learn that to be abandoned is terrifying, and that to be overly emotional, to be truly authentic, is connected to that. So we have to sacrifice our authenticity in order to maintain that attachment. And this creates this deep fear inside of us of being disliked, of being abandoned or judged or alienated from those that we are close to. And slowly, slowly, we start to learn that it's much safer to please those around us, to keep them happy, to be liked by them, and therefore to receive their support and to get our needs met through that process. So really we can see and understand nice guy syndrome, as it's commonly referred to, as a coping or survival strategy. This is layered and layered and layered with experience after experience after experience that continues throughout our childhood, throughout our years in school, reinforced by the relationships that we have with our peers, with our teachers, the institutions that we are a part of. Because we are deeply social creatures and we want to thrive and exist and survive in the social environment, in the social matrix somehow. And yet, this comes with significant trade-offs. Yes, it is successful. It does allow us to survive and get our needs met on a certain level, but it also comes with a cost. These coping mechanisms and patterns functioned effectively in childhood because that was all we had at our disposal. We literally didn't have another choice, nor were we taught another way. And yet when we reach adulthood and find ourselves exploring life from a much more autonomous place and start entering deeper interpersonal relationships, this is where we start to encounter some of those negative consequences and points of friction. And there is a certain negative connotation to nice guy syndrome. As we've discussed already, some of those characteristics, they don't necessarily look so good. And deeper than that, they don't necessarily actually allow us to get our needs met and allow us to thrive. Okay, maybe we survive with these coping mechanisms, but they're somewhat dysfunctional. It comes with a cost. And if we want to actually get into a position of thriving, we need to develop a better way. So first, let's understand the deep nuances of the negative consequences of nice guy syndrome, and particularly the psychological and the relational impacts that this has. So first of all, emotional suppression is one of the core sort of drawbacks of nice guy syndrome. This is basically constantly prioritizing others' needs, which creates this need to suppress our own feelings in order to meet their needs. And this builds up this internal stress and frustration and resentment because our emotions are basically bottled up and kept under the lid, like a pressure cooker that's slowly starting to boil. If we're constantly suppressing what we feel and sacrificing our authenticity, that can work for a little while, but it's not really healthy. And we see this playing out in men who have suppressed their feelings for a long time. It tends to eventually bubble over and explode. If we're constantly trying to please those around us at the expense of what we feel and what we need, that creates this deep internal frustration and suppressed anger. If that builds up for long enough, eventually all it takes is a little spark to let off the bomb. And that can often result in us exploding in ways that seem disproportionate to the situation that we're in. All it takes is someone to cut you off in traffic, or your girlfriend or partner to express something in a certain way or in a certain tone of voice, and boom, that just triggers you and you react in a way which is not really appropriate for the situation or in the context of the situation. And if we look at it from a deeper lens as well, we can see that that's trauma stuck and bottled up inside. Trauma being the kind of authentic emotional reaction that got stuck. After a specific event or something happened, we weren't able to truly express what was inside of us, and that gets caught and bottled up and creates this friction point because we didn't feel safe to express it at the time. And if we keep bottling things up, that leads to sickness, dysfunction, autoimmune diseases, cancer, because we're not emotionally healthy. The body is not moving that energy. It's getting stuck in the system like a swimming pool that is like stuffed full of those plastic balls, that it no longer has any room. And so if you keep trying to chuck balls in there, eventually the balls are just going to start spilling out and creating a mess. The next major area is a lack of authenticity, which is really struggling to form genuine, authentic, sort of natural, healthy relationships. And that's a consequence of really not being true to ourselves. Not being able to show up with the truth of what you feel or the truth of what you need. Not being able to express and articulate yourself. A lack of authenticity is basically this rift between the facade that you show to the world, who you project yourself to be, and who people see you as, and the real you. The real you deep inside. And you can observe this when you find yourself being dishonest, when you find yourself having to hide, when you feel afraid to reveal things which are true about you, aka your shadows. Now, this can be sometimes quite difficult to pin down because this stuff is often locked away in your subconscious mind. You don't necessarily notice that you're doing it. And areas where you might like to start looking is your porn addiction, your use of drugs or alcohol, things in your past that you're not proud of, but that you nonetheless did, but perhaps you haven't told anyone. What you really think and feel that you would want to say, but you don't have the balls to. The desires that you have that are unexpressed or that you're afraid to admit to anyone. Your homosexual fantasies, your lusting over other women or people that you're not in a relationship with, your sexual kinks and quirks. And I notice this in my own life because I'm in a public eye somehow, and I find myself putting certain things out into the public and revealing certain things about myself, and other things I choose to not say. Part of that is strategic and also just a part of my own process, because I'm using this platform as a test for myself to actually show up authentically and real as much as I can. And gradually I'm letting out more and more and more, and finding ways to express the stuff that I maybe feel is a bit of an edge. And I've done the same process in my relationship. I began the relationship that I'm in from a deeply inauthentic place, like I couldn't express the truth, and I started the relationship with a lie, hiding parts of myself, hiding the truth. And slowly the truth had to come out. Slowly I built a relationship where I feel safe to reveal all of my deepest stuff, so I could start cleaning up the past. But there is still a cognitive dissonance of sorts between all of the deepest stuff inside of me and who I project myself to be, who you guys see. And I'm slowly trying to dissolve those boundaries. And that's part of my path, just as an example. That's why I admit a lot of the shameful, embarrassing, dark stuff about my past, because I want to go through the process of bringing that stuff out of the shadow and into the light, and to have it purified, and to repair this cognitive dissonance between the parts of myself that I show and that I'm comfortable expressing, and the parts of myself that I would prefer to keep hidden. And that we could call is a certain form of shadow integration. And I'm trying to do that for you guys, with you guys, to show you what that looks like, so you can hopefully follow my example and start to do this process for yourselves. Another one of the negatives is manipulative behavior. So we often use our niceness and our people pleasing and the good things that we do as a tool to get what we want, rather than being honest and direct. This is quite sneaky. And again, this will be a part of the shadow, because you won't know that you're necessarily doing this consciously, because that wouldn't fit with the image that you have of yourself as being this nice guy. And yet we often do things, good things for people. We show up and we're happy and pleasant and genuine and really trying to just be helpful. And yet on the other end of that, we can often have expectations of wanting our good deeds to be reciprocated, expecting something back in return, the good old covert contract. And we're shooting ourselves in the foot like this, because we're doing something nice and we're basically doing a good deed, but secretly we want something back in return. There's a subtle expectation, and that if that expectation isn't met, we'll get a bit shitty, we'll become passive aggressive, we will maybe make that other person feel it on a certain level, but rarely will we directly express our upset. So maybe it comes across in a passive aggressive way, like we just don't text them back, or we ghost them for a while, or we might leave like a snarky remark or comment. And so they feel it, but it's never directly stated. So there is a subtle manipulation happening in that. And in general, humans are incredibly manipulative creatures. I myself have behaved very manipulatively in the past, and in many ways still do. We're constantly gaming our relationships in a very subtle and very sneaky way in order to get what we want, in order to not have to reveal our vulnerabilities, in order to appear strong or like we're the man, or to be attractive to others, or to get sex, or to win money from people, or business. There's all kinds of social games going on all the time, and the nice guy is no exception. That's why there feels like there's something off about someone who's too nice. It feels off because it feels like it's not real. It's a facade. It's like a veneer on the surface, and then it's like, what's underneath all of that? No one should be that nice. Everyone has selfishness. They have their survival agenda. They have their needs. And they're trying to meet those needs all the time. And it feels kind of weird that the nice guy is never really asking for anything. He's just doing. He's just always nice. He's always fine. He's always pleasant. But something feels off about that, because it's like, who's like that? Everyone has down days. Everyone has frustrations. Everyone gets angry. Everyone can be a bit selfish. So why isn't he? It's like too good to be true. Like it doesn't add up. So that's how it looks like, and that's how it feels like, and that's how it is. It is too good to be true, and something doesn't add up, and there is an agenda underneath. It's a strategy. And it's often manipulative. It's being nice in order to get something back, even if it's just approval and validation. There's still an agenda there, and often nice guys will want a lot more back than that. Being nice just to get sex, scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, but you better scratch mine kind of attitude. That's the hidden agenda underneath the niceness. And that kind of sucks, that kind of sucks to be around guys that are like that, because you feel you can't trust them. And women don't trust them. Women have a sixth sense, a spider sense that is always like tingling. Something doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel truly authentic. There's like something is missing there. And it doesn't feel real. And so they tend to not meet the nice guy's unexpressed expectations, his covert contracts, because they can sense there's a subtle kind of manipulation there. And that leads to a chronic frustration in nice guys. They feel unfulfilled. They feel deeply unappreciated because their needs are not getting met. They're doing all this stuff. They're bending over backwards. They're running around trying to do all of these things in order to win approval and validation and to get what they need. And their needs are still not getting met. Deeply frustrating because it's dysfunctional. So they're left feeling like they're in a cage, that no matter how many efforts that they go to and all of the things that they do to go out of their way, their needs are still not met. Deep down, they feel fake and empty because they're out of alignment with their values and their needs. They're not being real in their feelings, and they're often deeply out of integrity with themselves. So that is the plight of the nice guy. It's frustrating for him, and it's frustrating for the people around the nice guy because the relationship is superficial. It's full of hidden, unexpressed expectations, and there is this kind of manipulation going on, which doesn't feel very good. It's not real. It's not authentic. It's definitely not healthy. So now let's discuss the comprehensive strategy for healing nice guy syndrome. I want to give you guys like a blueprint to follow, like a systematic process of steps that will help you to start healing and addressing these dysfunctional, outdated coping mechanisms and strategies we've developed from childhood and that we've dragged into the present all the way up until this day, which are polluting our relationships and putting us in this place of frustration and not getting our needs met. So the first place to begin with any problem that we're facing is awareness, self-awareness, and acceptance. Really coming to recognize that these patterns exist inside of us because they were necessary. We needed to develop these strategies in order to survive. That's what actually allowed us to progress from being an infant to the stage we are today. So in many ways, we can be grateful that we actually found a way, that we actually found a system of coping mechanisms and strategies and behaviors that enabled our survival. So it's okay to be a nice guy. It's okay to have these mechanisms playing out inside of you, because this is the starting point or the continuation point for our own continued development through the developmental stages. Without those strategies, maybe we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have got to this stage. So it's really important to accept and validate the fact that we have these tendencies. It's okay. And that actually it's been a good thing. And at the same time, we can acknowledge that it has its limits and that it's served its purpose and it's time for us to grow beyond. It's really important that we start to see these mechanisms playing out inside of us, connecting the dots, educating ourselves and starting to really self-reflect and see how this is playing out in our lives and starting to like bookmark the moments when we see the patterns. This is crucial because from there we'll be able to start choosing different behaviors and different strategies, and we'll talk about that in the next points that I want to make, exactly what those strategies look like. So we have the old dysfunctional coping mechanism. We're going to start supplanting that with a new, more functional, healthier coping mechanism that actually leads to us being empowered instead of crippled and frustrated. So the first one of those is learning to set boundaries. In order to do that, we need to understand the importance and to learn about interpersonal boundaries and what that even is and how it looks to basically start to define the limits of what we feel is okay and not okay. We need to learn to face the fear and discomfort of saying no to people when you really mean it, and also just in general, learning to express our feelings, to basically reclaim our authenticity and start living in alignment with that, which means defending our boundaries and starting to establish safety for ourselves instead of collapsing. We need to start standing up for ourselves, essentially, and advocating for our needs to get met, and learning how to actually negotiate boundaries in an elegant way, and not just like putting a wall in front of someone and say, hey, this way, it's my way or the highway. Either you do what I want or fuck off. That's not a boundary. That's a wall. And often nice guys swing from boundarylessness to not having any boundaries at all, to really trying to assert their boundaries in an overly aggressive way. It's like the pendulum swings from all the way without any boundaries to aggressive, egotistic, domineering kind of boundaries. And they get kind of can get drunk on their own power. So we need to be aware of that and somehow cautious, and learn to negotiate our boundaries in a win-win manner. So that becomes a mutually beneficial negotiation with others, instead of being like, hey, it's my way or the highway. It's like, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I need, and I'm open to hearing your perspective. How might we navigate this in a way that leaves me feeling safe and respected, and you also get to express your truth? Or you also get to get your need met in a certain way. You feel the difference there, right? It's much more collaborative. And that's a skill. That's something we need to practice. And it gets easier and easier the more that we grease those grooves and start practicing and getting reps in. And we get more and more comfortable with that process, and that starts to enable us to feel safe in the presence of others and to get the respect that we deserve. We've also got to start developing our ability to be assertive, to have an assertive capacity within our communication. So that means really being able to express our needs, feelings, and desires in a clear and at the same time respectful way. And that means we also need to be okay and comfortable within ourselves if our needs are not met, or if others don't reciprocate in the way that we had hoped, or they don't want to. That's okay. That doesn't mean we need to capitulate. That doesn't mean we need to sacrifice our needs. We need to be okay with others not meeting them. And if that's the case, there might need to be follow-up consequences. If I ask my partner for respectful communication and she continues to tell me to fuck off, I can express my need for clean, caring, considerate communication with her. She doesn't have to meet that. She might say, no, I really need to express my pain in this way, and that's not something I'm willing to compromise, and she keeps doing it. Then I might need to reevaluate the relationship and decide if this is the kind of relationship that I want to be in, and decide if I'm willing to negotiate that boundary. And if it's not, I need to be able to say, hey, this is not the kind of relationship I'm looking for. I feel a deep need to be respected and to be talked to in a clear and healthy way. And if we can't do that, then I'm not going to continue to be in this. And I think it might be better if we love in different directions. And that's a skill. We need to practice that. We need to be able to express ourselves clearly, authentically, advocating for our needs and willing to negotiate. And also to be okay and to trust ourselves and have the strength within us to take hard decisions and to take a stand and to have a place where we do draw the line. That's what it means to have an assertiveness in our communication. We know where the limits are. We're comfortable talking around those limits, and we're comfortable making decisions if those limits are not respected. And in this way, we actually learn to shape reality around ourselves. Instead of being the leaf in the wind, as the nice guy often is, because he's too afraid to truly express what he thinks, what he feels, what he needs, and what's okay and what's not okay, he becomes at the mercy of others who might have a stronger opinion than him, who might have a clear direction or definition of what they want. And so, he just goes along with it. It's better to be in connection and to get some kind of validation than to be completely rejected and cut out. And he's terrified of being rejected and abandoned, so he will compromise and sacrifice his needs. If we want to evolve through this coping mechanism, we need to address that underlying fear and really establish the capacity to be autonomous. And that confidence in our ability to be autonomous comes out in our ability to communicate in an assertive way. We also really need to start developing emotional honesty. Really having the balls to communicate the truth of what we feel and what we desire and what we need. We need to open up about how we feel without having or being crippled by this fear of judgment. It's okay to have the fear, but we can't let that fear cripple us and stop us from actually expressing. Without emotional honesty, we're going to continue to remain inauthentic. And authenticity is so crucial for building genuine connection and healthy relationships. In fact, you can't build genuine connection or healthy relationships without authenticity, without showing up with the real you. So we really need to start practicing this and honing this and taking this on as a challenge. And that involves integrating the difficult negative emotions that exist inside of us. That means confronting our fear, acknowledging and sitting with the anger, the resentment, the shame, the guilt, the grief, all of these heavy negative emotions. We need to learn to integrate them and express them in a healthy way. And thereby pull those plastic balls out of the pool and start creating more space inside of us. To free ourselves up from all of the trauma, all of the repressed emotions, all of that bottled up shadow that's existing inside of us needs to slowly find resolution and find space to be expressed. So we need to find healthy ways of doing that. We need to create the kind of relationships that facilitate that and make space for that. Conscious relationships. I recently did an episode on conscious relationships and how you can start building those. If you haven't listened to that, it's definitely worth going back and checking that out. Through this process, we're going to start to develop our self-worth. We're going to start being more authentic and identifying our needs, desires, and the things that fulfill us. We want to engage in activities and habits that really foster this deep sense of self-esteem, which is an internal appreciation and validation of who you are. It's very hard to do that without engaging this practice of becoming authentic and really getting in touch with what you feel. We want to develop a sense of self-worth that is independent of others. So we're not at the mercy of them giving the approval that we crave. Behind this whole mechanism of pleasing people, people pleasing, is this hungry emptiness, this yearning, this void inside of us that we're trying to pull resources and validation and approval from others into in order to somehow fill this gap and this emptiness, this void inside of us. And that is dysfunctional. It's okay to do that a bit. It's okay to obviously receive the gift of relationships that we have with others and to feel appreciated and loved and valued by others. It's a beautiful place to get approval, and this can certainly be a component of the self-worth that we develop. But it's a problem then when that becomes our main strategy. It's like we're reliant on external validation instead of actually developing the intrinsic qualities and character traits that allow us to validate ourselves. So this really takes us into the habit of developing a purpose in life, developing hobbies and pursuits, and really leaning into your core values in order to build a life that is in alignment with yourself and what is actually most meaningful in life to you. And if what is most meaningful in life to you is getting the approval of other people, it's a pretty shaky foundation. We want your pillars of approval to come from the work that you put in to shape the character of who you are. The deeply meaningful impact that you're having on yourself through your dedication to education, personal growth, and development. Your forays into developing your state of consciousness and achieving higher states and stages of consciousness. A deeply contemplative, self-reflective practice and existence that allows you to thrive and find constant fascination and satisfaction in yourself, in your mind, in your emotional universe, in the process of learning. And then on top of that, we can layer all of our relationships, the meaningful work that we do in the world, and all of these things that are external to us. That's still there. But we're not obsessively focused on that. We're not dependent on that. That's like the icing on the cake. The cake is what we build inside of us. The cake is you, not just what you do for other people. That's just the icing. And this will help to instill in you a deep self-love at the end of the day. Not in the kind of placating, superficial, throwaway line like love yourself. You just got to love yourself. Just be yourself. But in the deep sense of like a profound internal recognition of your own true value. Not through the eyes of others, but through your own eyes. Like a deep reverence for the source of your entire being and the mystery of your own existence. I've had over the years a number of life-changing experiences and states of spiritual awakening, which that was for me a real gateway into self-love in a way that was previously, completely unexplored, undeveloped. And ever since those experiences, it's like I fell in love with myself in a very deep sense of the word love, like a deep, unbreakable self-acceptance, and like just devotion, like a love, like a deep. It's hard to even put it into words. It's like a deep feeling, like the deepest possible recognition of the priceless value of my own existence. But not as an idea, not as a mental concept, as an experience, as a knowing. Not just a belief, not just a platitude, but a deeply felt knowing. And we want more of that. We need more of that. Because no one can take that away from you. And that changes the relationship that you have between self and other, because you've met yourself in the deepest possible way. And you can only truly create deep and meaningful relationships with others when you've met yourself in a tremendously deep and profound way. So that's a game changer, and we want to work towards that. We also just want to engage in stuff that we do for ourselves, like powerful, inspiring, motivating hobbies or projects or commitments and practices that we just really enjoy. Jiu-jitsu for me has been an amazing source of self-validation because I love the process of learning and skill acquisition and like leveling myself up and sharpening myself and getting more and more deadly, awakening the warrior archetype inside of me. As an example, I like playing chess and getting better at chess and studying strategy and sharpening myself in that domain, because I like the qualities that it brings inside of me. I like this attitude of awakening the warrior, developing strategy and, like a strategic mind, planning, looking into the future, seeing things several moves ahead, looking into the actions or reactions of my opponents and gauging and readjusting and reevaluating my strategy. I find that deeply satisfying for my own mind. Like a game that I'm playing with myself somehow. My personal practice, my spiritual attitude, my development of my capacities in meditation and breathwork, my exploration with psychedelics, all of this is the relationship with myself, which enhances my capacity and my self-worth, because I don't need someone external to me to validate me. Of course, it still feels nice. I still appreciate it. It still speaks to a part of me, but I'm not dependent on it because I have built such a rich set of practices and components and pillars of my life that don't involve other people giving me what I want or what I need. There is still components which do that, but I've already built this cake. That stuff is just the icing on the cake. Another really important component as we look to heal and evolve through these nice guy coping mechanisms and patterns of behavior is seeking support. I definitely wouldn't be where I am now without the support of my men's group, the various different coaching containers that I've been a part of and done, and invested in. Therapy is really important, especially if you have a history of trauma, abuse, and you have a lot of unresolved issues from the past. It can be amazing to get coaching or therapy to really get into the deep mechanics and the deep psychological nuances that exist there. It can be very, very healing and advance your personal growth and development rapidly. If you don't have a men's group, join a men's group. It's amazing to see and feel the reflection of good, integrous men on the path of personal growth and development who are going to reflect you and call you forward, call you into that higher version of yourself that wants to be expressed. And we can receive and assimilate the qualities of the other men in the group and the ideals that we're aspiring towards through a kind of process of osmosis, if you like. Really investing in personal growth and development in general, as well as your relationship skills, is just crucial, because a lot of these wounds and coping mechanisms developed in relationship, they're attachment wounds, and they will find their resolution and healing and will gradually stitch the wounds back together in relationship to others, because we need somewhere that's going to trigger that stuff in us. We need to see the patterns playing out. We want to be able to observe those mechanisms and start choosing different behavior. So my relationship has been just an amazing source of healing and growth. So supportive. Having the right person by your side is just absolutely essential, because they will help to mirror all of your stuff, and the person we have the closest, or the people we have the closest, is going to be the most high resolution mirror. So my partner is constantly reflecting things, patterns, nuances of my psychology to me, and that is helping me to make constant micro adjustments or even macro adjustments. So having that kind of relationship, a growth-oriented relationship, a conscious relationship, is just invaluable in this direction. And if you haven't got that, it's something you definitely need to work towards. And all of this content, all of this theory that I'm presenting with you, and the practices and exercises I give you guys, is also going to help support that process of finding the right person to be with. And in general, populate your mind and consume content that is helping you to connect all the dots, that is giving you a broad exposure to a diverse set of perspectives. Don't just put yourself in a little echo chamber, consuming the same voices all over again. This applies to me as well. Expose yourself to a diverse range of experiences. That is what it means to be a tier 2 thinker. At a tier 2 level of development, is you're able to put together and see the truth in all perspectives as we start to unify our understanding of life and reality. We don't just become ideological and fixated on one point of view, one dogmatic belief system. We want to expose ourselves to massive amounts of perspectives and start to use that to fill in all of the gaps. We want to expose ourselves to different practitioners, different thought systems, different philosophical systems, and really start to rack up a vast amount of personal experience, direct experience, because that's the mother of all learning, is the observations and connections that we form through direct experience, and piece together and fill in and validate the theory that we've filled our mind with. So that is the comprehensive kind of perspective that I wanted to give you guys as a sort of strategy for overcoming these coping mechanisms of nice guy syndrome, as well as the people-pleasing tendencies that we have. Now, I just want to address a few common objections that I can foresee coming up or maybe being triggered in your mind. And in the past, I've released content related to this topic, so I know some of the common objections that come up. The first one is, isn't being nice a good thing? And yes, being nice is a good thing, but that's not the issue here. The issue is the underlying motivation behind the niceness. And the problem in our situation is the lack of authenticity and the kind of manipulative undertones. That's what's problematic. Being nice is good. It's good to be a nice guy. To be a good man. To be friendly. To be amiable. To be relatable. To be kind. Those are beautiful qualities in men. We just don't want to use that as a manipulative strategy to get our needs met. We want to be nice and good because we are nice and good for no other reason. Because that's what our heart wants to express. True kindness is very, very valuable, but it needs to come from a place of integrity and a deep self-respect and a respect for others. So make that important distinction. The next common objection is, won't people dislike me if I change? Yes, some of them might. But you have to question if those people can't accept the real you when you're actually genuine and you are really expressing yourself authentically. Are those really the kind of people that you want to have around you? Genuine relationships really actually thrive on honesty, mutual respect, and deep authenticity, not on these kind of placating behaviors where you're just doing something to keep someone happy, or you're just behaving in a certain way so they approve and validate you. That's not really authentic, and it's not really a profound or healthy relationship. That's a superficial, dysfunctional relationship. And we need to develop the inner strength necessary to be able to make tough decisions or let relationships go if they're not in alignment with our core needs. We need to have the self-worth and a deep connection to our standards to be able to say, this is not what I'm looking for in my life. This is not the kind of relationships that I need around me. I want to be surrounded by people who love and accept me for who I am, not what I do for them. And that's a developmental step. That's a leap some of us need to take. I remember when I finally cracked and I had a day where I finally understood that my needs are important and I deserve to have them met. And it was like this ripping off of the cage that I had put around myself that set me free. And yeah, it ruffled some feathers. I actually had to say goodbye and cut a number of relationships in my life. It was through that process that I actually developed the strength to leave the ideology that I was subscribing to and the high control group that I was involved in. So ultimately, it caused a massive shake-up in my life. The people around me didn't like it, but that was actually the best thing. That was me taking a stand and finally having the balls to live in my truth and to shake off the shackles that I had allowed to be clamped around my ankles. And since then, I've been living life on my terms instead of anyone else's, which feels fucking amazing. Like I'm finally living the life that I want instead of the life that other people want for me or wanted me to play somehow. So decide within yourself if that's worth it, if that is something you're willing to do, to be able to take a stand for that, and decide what kind of relationships you want around you, what kind of people you need beside you, and stop compromising that for breadcrumbs. The next common objection is, how do I balance my needs with others? I've talked about this a little bit already, but it bears repeating. We need to be able to learn to compromise and find healthy ways of mediating and balancing our needs with those around us, instead of sacrificing our needs in order to keep others happy. This is a process of practice and skill acquisition. We need to learn how to consciously communicate. We need to learn to stand up for our boundaries. We need to learn how to negotiate win-win outcomes. That balance means considering your own needs as well as the needs of others. It's not just all about you. It's, okay, here's my needs. These are important. How does that land with you? What are your needs? How might we find a middle ground to make this possible? To make our relationship thrive, to keep us in healthy relationship. So those are a few of the common objections. Now I want to touch on the big picture of personal growth and development and how this fits with nice guy syndrome and the kind of relationships that we want to create. So if we zoom out, we can see that really addressing nice guy syndrome is a part of a much larger journey. And that is the journey towards becoming a more fulfilled and deeply authentic version of yourself. This is an integral part of the process that we're going through. Starting to recognize the limitations that exist inside of us, starting to acknowledge the dysfunctional coping mechanisms, the trauma that we're dragging behind us that has shaped our psychology, and we're starting to clean that stuff up. We're starting to restructure our psyche and address all the stuff from the past that we haven't really processed because we just didn't have the skills, we didn't have the perspective, we didn't have the resources, we didn't know how. And that's a fundamental step in our own growth and development in life. Super important. Super, super important. I can't stress enough how important that is. That's really like setting the foundation for our continued evolution. If we don't clean up the past, how are we going to process and grow further? Because we're just layering levels of the house on top of a faulty foundation. So it's really setting the stage for our continued personal growth and development, which is setting the foundation for our whole process of awakening and raising our level of consciousness. So these things are crucially interlinked. And it's important that we see that from a big picture, zoomed out perspective. This is not just about fixing your people pleasing. This is not just about not being the nice guy anymore. This is about a deep inner process of integration that is leading us somewhere, that is having a very important foundational place in our whole experience of life. Without healing this nice guy syndrome, we're never actually going to build the kind of healthy, conscious relationships that we need in our lives. And really, this process of healing nice guy syndrome is about actually developing the skill set and the relational intelligence to be able to build an incredible support network, to be able to create deeply fulfilling, intimate, profoundly romantic and healthy love relationships. Because it's the same skills: emotional intelligence, understanding your boundaries and standards, being able to articulate yourself, being able to consciously communicate, being able to negotiate that and build something very stable, very beautiful, very profound with someone that you just fucking adore. And you can build an amazing life together. That's quite difficult if we don't actually integrate all of this stuff. It's really important as well to acknowledge, if you don't have that kind of relationship, that it's this process of learning to show up authentically as who you truly are and how you want your life to unfold, what you're looking for, your vision for the life and the relationship you want to create. That's so fucking attractive. That will call in and help you to actually build really meaningful and deep connections with people. That's going to guide you in the direction that you want to go. So just stepping onto this path, just doing this kind of work is already setting you up. I hear from women like all the time on my Instagram, where are all the good conscious men? And I'm like, they're here. I see them. They're doing the work more and more. And hey, you're one of them. So you are a rarity. You're a commodity. You're something desirable already because you're engaged in this. And there's so many billions of men who are yet to reach this stage of development. So if you're here and you're listening to this, know that you're already taking a profound and really important step. You're actually interested in higher growth and development. You're becoming more conscious. You're committed to this path in your own unique, specific way. And that's deeply attractive. It's deeply valuable. And someday, someone special is going to recognize that. And you will automatically, through this process, resonate more with people who are also doing this kind of work in their way. And you will start to call those people in, and you'll find yourself surrounded by more and more people who appreciate and value things like this. So now I want to leave you with some homework and some exercises that you can start to engage this process wherever you are, whenever you listen to this, or when you get back to a place when you can. It would be really good to reflect on this question: when do you feel the most pressure to be nice at the expense of your own needs? What situations, what relationships, how does that look like? You can also ask, what are some of the situations where you've felt resentment after trying to please others? If you need to, you can pause this and come back and write these down. How would you act if you didn't care about what others thought about you? What would you really want to say? What would you want to do? How would you live your life? What decisions would you be making if you were living your life on your terms instead of anyone else's? You know, that's one of the most common regrets of the dying, is that I wish I lived my life on my terms instead of someone else's. So let's preempt that and ask those questions of ourselves now. Don't wait till your deathbed. Ask it now and start making decisive choices that lead you into a more aligned life. If you want to take it a step further and journal about these questions, that would be great. You can also try to brainstorm and find recent experiences or examples where you've struggled to set boundaries with people, or you compromised your boundaries in a way that left you feeling not so good or frustrated or resentful. And then think about solutions. How might you have approached that differently? What could you have said? How could you have approached it in a way that was negotiating a win-win outcome instead of a sacrificial outcome? Set a 30-minute timer on your phone and ruminate. Contemplate with a journal and a pen and paper and write about these and see what your mind comes up with. You could also practice role-playing, a more assertive, direct way of communicating. You can do that in a safe, kind of low-stakes situation or scenario, perhaps with a close friend, or even in front of the mirror. What would it look like to say no? Someone has asked you to come and move their couch this weekend and to help them move for a few hours. What would that look like if you said no, and how would you say it? While still being respectful. Brainstorm a few other scenarios or situations and practice speaking those words for the first time. Can be really powerful. Or find someone that you can throw that back and forth with. There's a great exercise you can do in a men's group as well. So I hope you guys have found this very interesting and insightful. If you feel called to experience this work in a deeper sense and join a community of like-minded men who are on this path, committed to this work, helping each other to grow and calling each other forward, you might like to consider joining the Conscious Masculine course and community. That's my men's community. You'll find the link to learn more about that underneath this episode. We do a lot of work as a group of men helping to sharpen one another, and there's a lot of pre-recorded deep content like this, which really explains and gives you practical steps to work through this and contemplate this stuff and see these patterns playing out in your life. I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and like this video, and I would love to hear in the comments some of your feedback, what you thought about this, what it connected for you. That really helps. This is the early stages of this work that I'm doing, and I plan to be doing it for a long time, so I really, really appreciate any feedback that you have. It really is very useful and valuable to me. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I want to leave you with a final insight and perspective. How will you ever experience the best of life while you're living in fear of the opinion of others? Think about that. Underneath nice guy behavior and people-pleasing tendencies is a fear of judgment, a fear of rejection, a fear of abandonment. And that really is like keeping us caged, because we're somehow constantly beholden to the expectations and the approval of others instead of being our own judge. And truly being in control of our destiny. Why not make this commitment to radical self-honesty and deep authenticity? That is a spiritual path for life in and of itself. And that's actually why I do this work. That's why I'm transmitting this, because I'm committed to that. I want to reveal all of my stuff. I want to pull everything apart. I want to put it all on the table. I want to take it out of the shadows and purge everything by bringing it into the light. So if you find this important, if you see that as a powerful concept and a guiding star in your life, that is a very, very empowering goal. Committing to radical self-honesty. Committing to truth. And having the balls to actually work and chip away at that until you're living in alignment with the truth. And that is really the act of setting yourself free. The truth sets you free, and if we align ourselves with the truth, we are walking towards freedom. Freedom to be yourself, freedom to speak your mind, freedom to feel, freedom to live life on your terms instead of anyone else's. Because it's only when your mind is truly free that you're actually able to really discover the ultimate truth about yourself and about life. That's the work that we're doing here, so I hope you feel inspired to walk this path with me. Because if you think about it, what better goal is there than that?